Good evening, y'all.
Yo, Lennart.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hello.
So how's everyone doing in this sunny afternoon, at least in Utrecht?
Here as well, can't complain.
In Lisbon is awesome. Almost 30 degrees, I think.
All right.
Oh, nice.
I almost feel bad for saying that I'm in the garden.
So if you have any relatives that are interested in OutSystems, let them join. We want to crush the US record of 250.
Has to be done.
All the kids, family, dog.
If you have multiple devices, just log all them into Zoom.
Are we going to have Mendix developers?
Separate Zooms, not one.
Yeah, separate accounts.
Separate Zoom accounts.
Well, we are not sure, Vera. We're going to know at the beginning. There will be a pool. Oh, there's a cute baby there.
Exactly. It's Peter's training him
Peter
to
can start early in his training.
He has a Neo.
Of course he has. Best friend. What a suspense here.
Yeah.
We're all looking at that number going up and up.
Yeah.
I'm especially jealous of Daniel Koolman. Very nice location.
Yeah. He knows how to treat himself right.
Peter Muntz is also doing pretty well.
So how's things over in places which are not the Netherlands, in terms of like loosening up the lockdowns and etc.? You know, other countries that are not Netherlands?
Well, we have now, by the way, the Prime Minister at the same moment.
Oh, do we? All right. Was that appointed, or is this like an emergency thingy?
I think
No, I
it's
think
every
it was
Tuesday.
scheduled.
He has a little
It's
talk.
just the Tuesday's talk, which we have every fortnight now.
I think he's just trying to steal our thunder.
Yeah, so that's why we don't have
Unbelievable.
200 competitors.
Unbelievable. This guy.
We passed 100.
That's a start.
Let's double that.
Yes, if we get 200 likes, Martin's going to do something preposterous.
So if we all do 2 thumbs up, then we have 200 likes, right?
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
Touché.
Miguel, we also have the Kahoot to play, so whenever you want to, just let me know.
Yes, guys.
I don't know. Is this something that would be suitable at this point?
Yeah, just to entertain the ones that are already here, and while we wait for everyone else.
Take it away, Katarina.
I'm gonna do that then. So guys, you need to go into the link or download the app and place the game pin on the screen.
Kata, can you
This
put
is
the
really
music
cool.
louder? Please. Perfect.
Let's see who knows more.
I think this game should be a PWA. It's easier.
Good challenge, Ruben. Do you want to create it?
Precisely, Ruben, go ahead.
Anyone wants to join this new project?
I'll supervise.
I have no idea what I'm doing here, but okay.
I volunteer for the QA team to do the tests, quality tests.
So what happens?
I'm going to start the game. So is anyone else joining, just so I know?
They just lucked out, just start.
Yeah.
Can I play, Katarina?
Oh,
No.
now you can. But you could.
Certain people should not be allowed to play alone.
"2001, guys. Tropical mouse on the front.
What is that? Mendix? Never heard of it.
Fast
Well,
Jaguar.
He was fast to get.
Is that really a question?
Of course, and the answer is quite easy.
It's many.
Exactly.
How?
Pacquiao.
Fast Jaguar still ahead.
Keeping it in the family. Not.
They are not family. Expert Quail going ahead. That was close. Expert Quail still leading. Nice. Almost everyone knew the answer. Dandy slot ahead. Okay. Last question, everyone.
Miguel, you are safe. No questions about null values.
Oh, thank God for that.
Oh my God, Ruben, too soon.
Yay.
All right, so who was that?
Yeah, come on, Dandy slot.
Remco.
Of course.
Yes.
But I'm seeing that some people cannot join. The link is not working or something to the Zoom meeting. Not sure if you're on the Macs or something.
Some computers, it doesn't work on the Chrome browser. You have to use a different one because of the certificate thing.
For me, it worked on Chrome.
Yeah, or just download the client.
It's also being recorded, right? I'm not sure whether the rest should all wait for another 10 minutes.
Is anyone going to like dance or sing or do mime until the session starts?
Didn't we
is your
decide
job.
that was your job?
That is your job, Andrea.
You already know.
Besides myself, I deserve a break every now and then.
Okay, I
But
nominate
thanks for
Eric.
putting me on the spot, guys.
I nominate Eric to show us his feet.
My feet.
Yeah, it's less hairy than your head.
You don't know. I have quite a hobbit feet.
Alistair, we're trying to break a record. We're not trying to scare people away. Come on, Alistair. Come on.
We have a kid in the room. We have a kid in the room, please.
Oh,
That was so weird.
We surpassed 150.
We have indeed.
At least we got 10 Mendix developers on board.
Already? Cool, there should be more.
Even Betty Blocks is in the house.
Awesome. The more the merrier.
Yeah. But what time do we actually start? Is it 1:15 or?
Yeah, I think we should start in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. We're ready for it. Yeah.
Hey, that's not fair. They count as 2.
Yeah, that's. I can maybe Remco can join on his phone.
But you're together?
Yeah, we
You're
are.
not keeping a security distance.
No, but
Come on,
yeah,
people.
They've got the plastic between them. We
No,
just
it's kind of a
cannot see.
reverse fisheye, so we seem closer than we are.
Actually,
I'm not gonna say anything.
Killian is really big, so he's 2 meters more to the back. It's all perspective.
Yeah.
We've got this crazy rule in South Africa where you can't sit next to your wife in the car. She's got to sit in the back seat, or you've got to sit in the back seat, because you have to be socially distanced. And you're like, how stupid is this? You come back home, what are you going to do? Like, sleep in different bedrooms, or one sleeps on the floor? Okay, that's not every night.
That's South Africa for you.
I know, right?
Weirder rules there.
It's crazy. Stupid.
Eric, how do you miss South Africa?
Oh man, it was brilliant over there though.
I know.
Can't get him to come back. Can't get him to come back.
Best times, especially when the Portuguese left.
Eric is afraid of the sharks in Port Elizabeth.
I haven't even been yet. I haven't even been to Cape Town yet. It's a disgrace, I know.
It's a shame.
I know. I was kicked out before I could go.
I have invited you back.
Yeah, but I can't. I told you, get me a visa and I'll be there next day. Keep telling me, I'm still waiting.
Get me a what?
A visa.
Oh, I heard pizza. I was like, give me a what?
Pizza is also fine.
Hey guys, it's 1:15. Let's get started.
Let's get started indeed.
Go.
Let's do it then. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for attending on behalf of all the Kevin crew. We hope that you have a pleasant journey. I think this is going to be a very interesting one in particular, because a lot of us sometimes stand on one side of the fence, and we hear about the other people and we go like, well, our technology is the best one and the other one, boo boo. I actually, I had the opportunity to work in the last few years with some Mendix developers who were absolutely awesome developers and awesome professionals and great people. And, I understood that there's a lot that any technology developer can learn from other technologies, maybe, different ways to go about doing the same thing in your language. And I think it's very, very productive to have an open mind in here, how people tackle the same kind of problems in other syntaxes, as it were. So so hopefully now today we'll hear a little bit more about the other technology that we don't know so much about. And who better to tell us than two very experienced Mendix developers that have recently also started developing in OutSystems. So I'll just hand it over to Kilian Kroos and Remco Snijders. Guys, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. We will try to share our screen.
There we go. How can we hide this? Go away.
Cool. Assuming that you can see your screen now. Welcome to the meeting, OutSystems and Mendix, a tale of two platforms. We were trying to hit the maximum of attendees for a user group meeting, but we heard it was 250 in the US. So we blame Mark Rutte for this one, that he gave his press conference at the same time, unfortunately. Before we start with the contents, we just quickly want to go over the meeting rules, which are pretty standard for most of them. Your microphones will hopefully be muted by now. If not, please mute it yourself. During the meeting, we'll be using Slido. So via this code or QR code, you can join the interaction portal where we, at the end, will do the Q&A. So at the end of the presentation, we will first talk for roughly an hour. Then we'll have half an hour in which we will answer your questions. You can leave your questions by submitting them through the Q&A at Slido. Yeah, and use the same name as in Zoom, because that makes it a bit easier to unmute you. And the nice part about that is that you can also vote on questions so that we can see which questions are most popular and which ones we need to address. If there are questions and remarks about the meeting itself, so not for the Q&A at the end, please just use Zoom chat for that, and that will be looked at. Then let's go to the meeting. We'll first start by telling a bit about ourselves and why we are giving this meeting. Then we'll dive into the history of both platforms a bit, because that provides already a pretty clear picture of where the differences and the similarities are. And after that, we'll actually dive into a case, and we'll look into the Mendix Studio Pro and into Service Studio. And we'll compare the data, the logic, the interface, and the processes of both platforms. And after that, we have listed a couple of use cases where we think it might be, one platform might have some benefits over the other platform. But we do want to give you the disclaimer that after this presentation, we're not going to say one is better than the other. We are just going to share our observations that we experienced in the past years. And it's up to you to make your choices or make your opinions after that. And yeah, and as said, after the hour of presentation, we'll have half an hour of a Q&A session, because we thought it's quite important to mainly answer the questions that you have, instead of just sending what we think is important. So let's get started. So my name is Remco Snijders. I'm currently working at Cotronic since October last year, so pretty recently. And that's when I also started with OutSystems. So I was only able to add my second batch of the professional web developer this morning. So very happy with that. Before this, I worked for 5 years at First Consulting, where I almost all of the time worked as a Mendix consultant. So there I retrieved all the Mendix certifications. And before that, I studied at Utrecht University and I did business informatics.
Okay, yeah, let me double check that the camera is okay. I don't know if I can see myself, but I assume it's okay if I see Miguel or not. My name is Kilian Kroos. I've been working all my professional career as a low-code developer. Started off at Capgemini, where I exclusively worked with the Mendix platform. Then I moved to Conclusion BAM, where we actually used both platforms. And in I think the middle of 2015, I got to know Miguel Melo during an OutSystems training, and also got really enthusiastic about the capabilities of the OutSystems platform. And at that point in time, it was for me kind of opposite for compared to the majority of you, because I knew OutSystems as the platform where, as a Mendix developer, I once in a while lost a project to. But also got really happy with the capabilities of OutSystems, and at conclusion we started a company that focused on both low-code platforms. And recently, well, already about a year ago, sorry, I joined Team Resilience, where we exclusively work with the OutSystems platform. Some things, certified professional web developer, certified expert Mendix developer, and also one of the MVPs for a couple of years. And I used to be, I spoke at, I think, the 3 latest Mendix World sessions. And I like to talk about low code and what it can bring to all of us as developers in business. So to get kind of a sense of who you actually are, I think there's about over 150 people in the meeting now. I should be posting a poll now on Slido. So I hope you all have joined, and I hope this also works. Yeah, there we go. So to kind of see who we have in the audience, a lot of expert OutSystems developers, also obviously a lot of professional OutSystems developers, some Mendix developers. Welcome, guys. Since this is an OutSystems user group, I think this will probably be your first time joining one of these meetups, so feel welcome.
Welcome to the cool gang.
Oh, you shouldn't have done that, Andrea.
Welcome to the other cool gang. To the other cool gang.
Apparently Andrea has some superpowers or something.
I have a preference. I'm clearly biased.
Okay, let's wait for just a little bit. I still see some votes coming in. I think once I want to say reach 100, but it kind of seems to stall now. Okay, so a lot of OutSystems developers, I think 20, 40, 60%. Actually also quite a lot of business people. Yeah, okay, well, good to know. If you have questions for the Q&A, feel free to ask, but this at least gives us a little bit of idea of the audience. So thank you for that.
Maybe as a quick comment also based on this and what we expected this a bit. So we'll assume some OutSystems knowledge in most of our of the things we highlight. So we'll discuss a bit more about the Mendix side and a bit less about the OutSystems side. But if something is unclear, feel free indeed to add it to the Q&A.
Okay, moving on. So I first have to admit that you will see a couple of photos that I've stolen from the OutSystems Developer Conference from a couple of years ago. They were given by, they were taken during a presentation Paulo Osado gave. And I think they, I fortunately had those pictures still, but they illustrate very well the story of OutSystems and how they started. And we're going to tell you like how both companies started, because it for me clearly explains like the differences in how the platforms work. And yeah, if you understand where they're coming from and the problem they want to solve, then you also, I think you also will understand the platform they've built. So a long time ago, we still used to develop a software using waterfall methodologies. I think it's still being done somewhere. But what you see is that like the analysis phase is relatively cheap, and the further down you get the waterfall, the more expensive it becomes to change the software. And as we probably all know, software does change. Requirements are never right. And what you see is that like during time and the amount of changes you're making to the software, the complexity and the amount of money it will take to change software will usually increase. And so in Portugal in 2001, there were a bunch of IT guys where Paulo Osado was the founder, together with I think 4 other co-founders. They thought, well, let's assume that all the requirements we're gathering in those first phases are actually like by definition wrong or not complete. And what could we do? Like, wouldn't it be great if we can actually change or like lower the cost of changes? And with that idea, actually, the OutSystems platform was born. And like every good startup, they started in, I don't know, it looks kind of like a basement or a garage, but like started small and not a fancy office. An unlucky number 13, but apparently it worked out for them. they started and they founded OutSystems with the idea that, well, what if we could change or build a platform where you can change the software without increasing the price basically of changes. Because as you see in this picture, at some point, and I think we're still confronted with that a lot, software becomes legacy. It is so complex, people don't understand it anymore. And instead of like updating the software, you're just going to rebuild it using a different technology. So with that idea in mind, OutSystems was founded. And if you look at the website now, they have a quote: "What if instead of trying to get software right up front, changes were cheap and fast, independent of the size of applications?" So with that idea in mind, the Outsystems platform was founded. A couple of years later, instead of in Portugal and the Netherlands, there was this guy named Roald Kruid, one of the co-founders of Mendix, and he, well, I'm not going to say this story is 100% factually right. I think it is my slightly own version of it, but he did an IT studied computer science, I guess. Started his own company, built the software for his first client, and delivered it. And basically, the day they went into production, and this is not probably completely true, but I see this kind of happening, that the guy, like the business owner, calls him. It's like, "Hey, Roald, I'm sorry, but the software is not working." And so, he looks at all the, I don't know, in the console and the logs and the monitoring, and says like, "Well, the software is actually running fine." And then like the guy says, "Well, like, it's great that it's running, but it's not working for me." And so he was really surprised by that. It's like, how I'm a smart guy. I've studied on the university. How could it happen that I did not completely fully understand what this business guy wanted? So he decided to take an MBA, like a business class as well. And so they kind of started with the idea like, well, what happened if like we could bring the business and the IT together? Because apparently there's a gap. Those two worlds don't understand each other. You see the two quotes on screen. Like, so from the IT side, we say, well, why doesn't the business never actually know what they want? And like the business is thinking, why can those nerdy developers understand what we actually need? So there's a gap. And with nerdy, I'm not opinionated, so don't be afraid by that. On the other side, like Roald's brother Dirk Jan and Derek Roos, who is the current CEO, they were working on the business side and were actually experiencing the same or the similar issue from the business side. So so we're having IT projects. Why do they always overrun budget? And what we get in the end is never what we want. And basically, with that idea, they started Mendix as a platform to bring the IT and business world together. And on screen, you now see, I think, one of the original pitch slides they used. So their idea is to use a model-driven application development to create a common language between business and IT. So I think to summarize those, OutSystems is really focused, or at least was, and of course those strategies and ideas have evolved over time. But I think in essence, this is still very much valid. So OutSystems is focusing on making software changes cheap and fast. And Mendix is focusing on bridging the gap between business and IT. And if you look at both platforms, they are actually using that in a very similar fashion. So if you look at the like the latest software trends, I think they started both with a model-driven platform where you could model on like a higher abstraction level. They started using the cloud as a way to deploy applications and abstract from all the complexities. They've embraced Agile as a methodology that like really helps teams to make and change software. So there's a lot of similarities, but the focus point is actually different. So also try to keep that in mind, I think, while we are going to show you both development environments. And I think if you look at it from this perspective, you will clearly understand and see why things are built the way they are. So to illustrate this, we decided to use a case that is very familiar to pretty much all, I guess, OutSystems developers. It's one of the cases that's being used during the first OutSystems trainings, and it's the OutSystems movie database. I'm not going to explain all the details. We'll use this as a way to illustrate some of the points. And I think another thing to point out is like the structure of how we're going to show you is based on the structure in Server Studio, the development environment for OutSystems. And there you will see 4 different, I think tabs I can call them. One focused on processes, interface, logic, and data. So the next 4 slides will actually be those 4 topics, and we'll show you those points in both environments. So yeah, this is a brief slide. I think I'm going to close the presentation now. These are some of the points I will try to show you. But let's open up the developer environments and show you how it actually works. Let me pull up OutSystems. So this is Server Studio, the OutSystems development environment. We have an application and several modules, and I'm going to be focusing on data. So I'm going to open up the module that's like a core module focusing on storing and storing data. And now let's try to get this out of the way. What you see is like different things. We'll be covering the entities and I think structures as well. And I might mention some of the other topics. But you see, if you primarily start entering new entities, you'll do that from this, how do you call it? Tree item entry, whatever, from the database. And you can create like new entities, give it a name. I should give it a user group. And the same way you can add like extra attributes. This is done in a similar fashion in the Mendix Studio Pro. I think it's good to mention that Mendix has 2 development environments, one for the professional developer, which we will be using during this presentation. There's also a kind of a no-code citizen developer focused development environment that is doesn't contain all the features we have here. And that's a web-based tool, but we'll be using the professional environment. So in Mendix, you see a project with different modules, and every module automatically has a domain model where you define all the entities and attributes. And if you enter a new entity, you go here, click entity, and say, well, give it a name. Oh, my PC is a little bit slow. User group, and you start adding new attributes of different data types, and that's all done in a very similar fashion. I think something to point out, which is like the first difference here, is that if you look at the domain model at Mendix, you don't see any identifiers. So the movie actually in practice in the database does have a primary key, but it's not being shown in the domain model. And also the associations between the different entities, they let's undo the one so I can create a new one. So say if I want to create an association between the movie and the user group, I'd like drag a line between those two. Now I have a movie that can have a reference to a user group. And as again, like you don't see the foreign key here. It's implicitly done by using and by drawing this this association. If you look at the OutSystems side, you will see that like the movie will have an explicit primary key. And if you look into one of the other ones, I think for example, the user movie comment, you will see some foreign keys. So this table or entity has a reference to the user table and to the movie table. So I think technically they're both the same, but they're using slightly different approaches. In a similar fashion, which you can see here, is that Mendix supports like many-to-many relationships. And in OutSystems, you will have to model that yourself. So you create, I think, do we have one here? I don't think we have one in this model. But you can see, well, that this is also a many-to-many. So you create a cross table where you store associations to both sides. And Mendix does that kind of under the hood for you. The same thing goes for inheritance. I have to say that the use of this is It sounds great, but in practice, yeah, I think it's a good advice to avoid it because of all the complexities that happen behind the scene that you cannot control. But you can create an entity and say, well, inherit all the properties from the person, for example. And this is also very nice if you're going to start working with logic, where you can pass around generalizations, and well, you can probably see what you can do with that. So you can create logic that works for both types. Then again, this can also be done, of course, in OutSystems, but you will have to create a separate new. I think, yeah, I can just create it here. Create the actor, and say that if it extends the person table, I should make the identifier of type person identifier. And then I think what I added here was the minimum salary. So again, like these two are similar in techniques, but they're slightly different in how you model them. Let's see, I'm also looking at time. I think should I take another 3 minutes for the data? Because I don't want to spend all the time Remco can enjoy and entertain you guys. Enumerations are something different. Enumerations, I think that's kind of a similar concept to static entities. So here in Mendix, you can create basically a list of static values with a caption and a name. So it's a little less limited. No, not a little less limited. It is more limited than with OutSystems, because these are only captions and names, and it will only be text. So you cannot really add any other data types. But this is a way, like a lot of times, like for example, the genres. That's just a list of labels. If you look in OutSystems, you would use a static entity for that, which is also a similar. And I think the nice thing for both is that they're typed, so you can reference values of the enumeration or the static entity in a typed and named way. In OutSystems, however, you are able to add like extra attributes to the static entities. I think I'm going to speed up a little bit. There's something like delete behavior in both platforms. So in the associations or foreign keys, you can define how an object should behave when some other object related to it is removed. And in a similar fashion, you could do that in the Mendix platform. To go slightly more advanced, they both support defining indexes. So in Mendix on an entity, you can create new indexes. The platform automatically generates indexes for like all the primary and foreign keys for you, and I think that's the same with OutSystems. So if we look at the movie entity, you can add customized indexes, but automatically the platform already adds some indexes for the primary and foreign keys. Validation rules, event handlers. I think I'll skip those. Maybe we can use the Q&A if you're more interested in that. But I think I have shown you now the difference in identifiers, the many-to-many relationship, inheritance, static entities and enumerations, delete behavior, and indexes. The last few maybe during the questions. So now I will move back, stay away a meter and a half from Remco, and hand the presentation over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Kilian. So I will start with one of my favorite parts, the interface. Be careful. So the interface is something I think at first glance it looks pretty alike in both OutSystems and Mendix. I think the development environments for making a page, they look pretty much the same. But there are really some significant differences, and these are the main things that I would like to discuss around that. So for that, let's also go to the development environment, and let's open up for OutSystems another module, because that is a clear difference also, that you would develop your interface in OutSystems in a different module. In Mendix, it's very optional whether you want to do that or not. If we look at OutSystems at a page, most of you know that you're very flexible to define the state of the page in terms of what kind of variables you want. So you can add input parameters, and you can add local variables to a page, and those can be of basic data types, but also entities, also structure. So quite a lot of things. And quite an important thing is that nowadays with reactive apps, refreshing the value of a variable triggers also the refresh of that part of the page where the variable is used. So quite a useful feature. If we then look at how that is done in Mendix, let's move to the Mendix Studio. You see that in this page, there's no things such as input parameters or properties that you see here, but you do see that there's a block surrounding the whole page, which in this case says movie and it's a page parameter. And that is how Mendix opens a page. So every page can have a context, and a context is usually an object that you can give to the page once you open it. So if I double click this thing that's called a data view, you see that in this case it's a context, it's an entity, but I could also say I need logic to fill this page. Logic is something that we'll get into a little bit later. But that's quite a big difference between the two platforms. And you see in that sense that Mendix is a bit more object-oriented when it comes to pages, that they really want to stick to the objects, which could be, that's good to know. They could be persistable, they could be in your database, or they could be non-persistent, and then it's a bit more like what's in OutSystems we call structures. So it's not in your database, but in the case of Mendix, it is in your domain model. Then let's move on to the web blocks, because something that you probably do know in OutSystems is that you have web blocks, and web blocks are pretty much reusable components that you can use in a page, but they also have quite some behavior, so they can have their own logic. They can have events that trigger something in the parent, and just like the page, a web block also has input parameters and local. If we look at Mendix, Mendix offers something called snippets. I can just quickly add a snippet to show you what that is. So a snippet is basically a bit like a web block, but it doesn't have the logics part, and it doesn't have the event behavior. So what you can see is also the snippet here expects a context. So you can say that the snippet will expect, for example, a movie. And that means that any place where I want to use this snippet, I expect it to give it a movie. And then it will display the parts of the page that I want to display, that I want to reuse. But as said, no events. Another thing that's a reusable part in Mendix that's a bit similar to web blocks are building blocks. And if I show you what a building block could look like, so these are all the things that come out of the box, but you're also able to add your own building blocks. But for example, let's add the breadcrumbs. You see that it basically adds a pretty static block with a lot of elements. And in contrast to the snippet, this block doesn't have a context. It just has mainly a structure and styling for that structure. So it could have classes on every element, and thereby it allows you to at least use the same structure on multiple pages. And something that you might already see now from these examples is that Mendix seems a bit less what you see is what you get than OutSystems is. If you compare this page where you see the basic widgets to an OutSystems, a page where you already see the styling, that's correct. But Mendix does offer the possibility to switch to a design mode. And that already makes it much more comparable, because you still see directly the effect of what you're doing, and of CSS, as well as these things on the right, which are called design properties. And those are pretty similar, I think, to the properties that you have in OutSystems. So something that you learn quite quickly in the trainings of OutSystems is that, well, in traditional web apps, every page starts with something called a preparation that's triggered before the page actually renders, in which you can retrieve the data, and then you can let's go back to the structure mode. For example, here we have a data grid, which is the equivalent of a data table in OutSystems. And basically here we define the data that we want to get, and if more complicated, how we want to get it. And that means that it's a bit more implicit at what moment exactly the data is loaded into your web browser. So whereas with OutSystems, you really need to consciously decide in which order am I gonna load my data, and when is what is loaded when I render the page and what is loaded before I render the page. In Mendix, that's much more implicit, which makes it a bit easier for you to develop. You can actually go quite a lot faster with that part, but it's also a bit less flexible. So yeah, that's something that you have to find your preference in. Then while we stay in this widget, the data grids, we already see a big difference also between how we handle data grids and lists. In Mendix, these are the options you have when you want to fill a grid. So you say, I want something from the database, and you might add some constraints. So I might say I want the year equals a certain value. Or again, you could use logic or an association to fill the grid. Or you could use something that's called XPath. And basically, this is a very simplified version of a query. So also here we could put a certain query, and then the grid will be filled accordingly. If we look at OutSystems, on the other hand, if we go to a page, we see that this data table uses the, if you look on the right, as a source of the record list, it uses the getMovies.list, which we can find in the preparation. And if we dive into that block that's called an aggregate, which most of you probably know, you can define the tables that it gets data from, which is also a bit of a difference, because in Mendix, if you fill a data grid, you get the data from one table. In OutSystems, you could define joins here, and then you can make filters. That is a bit similar to the XPath in Mendix. And something that is also not supported out of the box in Mendix is an SQL query. In OutSystems, you could say, I want my SQL query in my preparation, and then you could really define with SQL what you want to retrieve from the database. In Mendix, it's also technically possible, but it doesn't come out of the box, so you would need to use an extension for that. If we look at the extensions that are available on the front end, which are for pages usually CSS and JavaScript. Let's start with OutSystems, because probably that's what we're most familiar with. OutSystems offers you to edit CSS on a couple of layers. For example, you could add CSS to a theme. You could add CSS here to a page. And you could add, to a model. In Mendix, you're able to go to the folder directory. And what I could do here, I can say show project directory in Explorer. And if I then go to the theme folder and the styles folder, you actually see that there's two folders, CSS folder and a SAS folder. And basically you write most of your custom styling. Of course, you can use modeler for this, like you can also do that in OutSystems. But it's more
Does Killian know that he's hanging?
Quite in the end, it's the same thing. It just creates a CSS for your page, but it is quite different how you apply it. And something similar for JavaScript. If we look at OutSystems, then like CSS, JavaScript can be added to a couple of layers. So for example, if I am on this page, I can add JavaScript here that is loaded when the page is loaded. Something similar could also be done for a weblog. Yeah, like the CSS, there's different layers in which you can define the JavaScript is loaded. But if you look at Mendix, the most common way, or there's actually two common ways to do this. You can add a widget, and we haven't added it to this project, but there would be a widget with which you can add custom JavaScript to your page, which is then loaded at the moment when the widget is reached in the rendering. Or another thing you can do is really write custom widgets, and that is actually quite a well, I wouldn't say a common thing, but if you are more experienced in developing Mendix, I think you will see it more and more, that you actually build the widgets with JavaScript yourself, and they have their own page lifecycle. And that is then the most common way to add the logic. Another way in Mendix to add the JavaScript is recently also nano flows. I will explain what those are a bit later. But as you will see, is also that here from a piece of logic, I can do a JavaScript action call. So that's also an ability to extend your front end with some JavaScript. And that brought us through these topics that we wanted to discuss for interface. So again, as with the data, what Kilian said, if you have any questions around this, please keep them for the Q&A. We're happy to answer them then. For now, we'll move on to logic. As I said already, Mendix has something called nano flows and microflows. OutSystems has server actions, client actions. So we'll quickly go into what the difference are between those. We will look also, like for the front end, we will also look at the back end possibilities for extension, and we'll look a bit at how you can retrieve data and how you can build integrations. So let's get going with that. I think this part is a bit more similar than interface. So I think we can go through it a bit quicker. As you see here in Mendix, we show something called a nano flow. And here in Mendix, we show something called a microflow. So not too much visual difference. And also, other than that, it goes from the left to the right instead of from the top to the bottom. It's pretty similar to what we're used to in OutSystems. We have the blocks, we have the splits, we have a start and end event. And similar to pages, you also could have an input parameter. I think something that is quite different in Mendix is that at the end of the flow, you can have one type of output. So in this case, we have an object that we output, but you could also have different types like basic data types, binary, Boolean, those kind of things. Sorry, yeah, and decimals. But you could also say I want a list of objects. If we look at OutSystems on the other end, and then, well, let's for now open a screen action. We can, or I have to go to a server action for that. To a server action in OutSystems, which is the equivalent of a microflow in Mendix, we can add output parameters. And in most of the cases, you can just add all the output parameters you want. So also of different types. So in that sense, there is quite a difference in how you use the logic between the two platforms. If you then look at the extension of logic, there's also not too much difference other than that the technology that you write your extensions for are different. In Mendix, you could write Java actions. In OutSystems, you can write .NET actions. But the way you do it is pretty similar, so I won't go too much into that. What I would like to show you is something that I also showed you on the page, is how to retrieve data. So I think that's pretty similar as you would do it on a page. If in Mendix we look at this microflow, you can that here we retrieve results, we retrieve data by association. But similarly, we can retrieve data from a database. And this might already look a bit familiar to you by now, because we can select an entity. And for that entity, we can write an XPath constraint. But also, it does have the same limitation that we also saw in the page. We can't do a join. And we can't write an SQL query directly in the platform. We would have to build an extension for that. If we look at logic in OutSystems, we would see that also, like in the preparation of the page, which is logic, we can here also in the server action, we can also add an aggregate, which gives exactly the same possibilities as we just showed. And yeah, I think those are the, also here we can do the SQL, so it's similar to what we discussed before. Something that we wanted to show, which is actually not that big of a difference, but is quite interesting to see that the two platforms sometimes use different naming, is that in Mendix, you have something, let's see if this flow has it, not directly, But in Mendix, you have an action which is called commit an object. So basically when you, in Mendix, you want to create something and then you want to save it later to the database, you would do your create object at the beginning, or your create records would be the equivalent in OutSystems, and you would commit it at the end of the flow. Whereas in OutSystems, you would have a, well, like this, we would have a local variable, and that would be created, what it's called, at the end. So it's, yeah, I think on the background, it's pretty much the same thing, but it is interesting in how they phrase it a bit different, and maybe the creating something in the beginning feels a bit more natural for somebody that's new to the whole application development thing. Whereas, yeah, I think for understanding that you need a local variable, that might require a bit more insight into how variables and parameters actually work in logic. One last thing that I would like to show you is the integrations. Both platforms support REST and SOAP integrations and are also pretty similar to implement. One difference that I would like to point out, and I'll just stick with the Mendix part for this, is that Mendix uses something called import and export mappings. So if you've built an integration, you can here build or actually load a JSON snippet, which explains the format of the data that you might import or export towards the integration. And then it has a pretty visual way to map that data. So you see the JSON structure basically on the right. It has this visual way to map that data onto your domain model. So whereas in OutSystems, it's a bit more part of all the logic flows you have, where you just say my integration has some input and some output parameters. In Mendix, you actually create mappings for the more complex structures. So in the end, it's the same thing. It's just a different language that is given to the developers. Yeah. So in general, a lot is the same, but there are some detailed differences. Processes. This one is that this one that we can go over pretty quick, because OutSystems has something that is a tab called processes, in which you are able to do case management out of the box in the platform. So you are able to define processes to launch them from certain actions or that happen or are triggered by the user. And in the process, you can define human or automatic steps, some waiting times, and some splits. In Mendix, it is possible to do case management like this, but you would have to build a custom module yourself. So what you often see there, what Mendix partners do, is they have a case management module that they reuse in certain applications. But it's not something currently that comes out of the box. I do think, though, that for both platforms, it's quite a hot topic. So this might change very near future. Yeah, so that is it for the 4 topics that we wanted to discuss. I don't know, how are we on time? We could discuss a bit more on infrastructure, or would it be?
Yeah, I think that's. I've been monitoring the questions in the Q&A. I think there's quite a lot of good questions. So I think we'll.
Let's just go through with this.
Yeah, let's go through those.
When we were preparing the meeting, we were discussing the contents of the meeting with a group of people, and we were discussing, is there anything missing? And one thing that was mentioned was, well, probably a lot of people are interested in which use cases are now a really good fit for OutSystems, which use cases are a really good fit for Mendix. And of course, that's a slippery slope to get on, because it's really dependent on how you develop it, what your experience is, and also the platforms are both changing pretty rapidly. But we've tried to make a not too risky overview of this. So let's see in the questions if you agree. If we look at OutSystems, also looking at where it comes from, it's a bit more focused on the IT savvy developers. It does also in the trainings and in the certifications. It expects a bit more of an IT mindset when you build an application. Whereas if we look at the Mendix side, it's much more focused on making IT accessible for the business. And that's also why in the recent years, I think they put quite some effort in the web studio, the web development environment that is even easier for business people to make an app with. if we look at OutSystems, something that we didn't cover in detail, but maybe we'll get through it in the questions, is that it's a bit more common to make an application landscape for an organization. So you make certain reusable registers and modules that are then reused in other modules, and it's all part of one big environment. Whereas in Mendix, you much more make apps that can integrate, but it's not presented to the developer as a landscape of your clients. And that's, yeah, you don't really have registers with their own database that you share in that landscape. So it's a bit of a different perspective there. That does make Mendix, together with emerging and branching behavior, which we didn't go into, but that's a bit more extensive in Mendix. That combination makes Mendix a bit more suitable maybe for if you have a really large development team on one application. Yeah, and the relatively isolated applications is connected to that. If you then look at OutSystems, also connected to the audience that it focuses on, I would say if you use really complex front-end interface and you want high control of, for example, your performance, but really of what happens in your client as well as your server, you have a bit more freedom in OutSystems than in Mendix. So Mendix thereby is very quick for the more standard use cases, but there might be use cases where you might reach some limitations and where you need to reach out to JavaScript or server-side code extensions yourself. Yes, I'm a bit more detail. If you look at mobile, I think it's difficult to say for mobile which one is better at the moment, because that's something that both platforms are really rapidly developing. So something that I'm saying currently might not be true 1 week from now. But in general, you see also their OutSystems is a bit more configurable, which does make it a bit more time intensive, but does allow you to tweak it as you want it. And you see that especially in data synchronization, where in OutSystems you really can say exactly what you want to synchronize. Whereas Mendix started with you can synchronize everything that's somehow connected to a user's account, and they're slowly moving towards more customization there, but it's not as flexible yet as in OutSystems. So we hope this gives a bit of an overview of the perspective of both platforms when you compare them. And then I think it's time to go to the Q&A.
Yeah, let's see if we can get the both of us in the let's switch screen chairs. Let's see. I think I should be able to pull up the Slido as well. Let me see if, where it is. Yeah, that one is. So this is the admin view. So I would suggest we just start from the top.
Yeah.
Let's get the elephant out of the room. Yes, Mendix does support null values. They're not called null, they're called empty. So maybe we can demonstrate this. Let's see. Here we do a retrieve. And for example, if I would have a split, I could say, is the results, are they empty? And this is basically the equivalent to null. So I think that will answer Daniel's question. Let's see, moving on to the next one. I saw there were several questions about the licensing model. Should I answer that?
Yeah,
Well, first off, I'm not a sales guy, so I usually try to get away as much as possible about the licensing models. I think quite recently they are on a very similar fashion now, since OutSystems, I believe, dropped the application objects in the latest license models, and they are on a per user based subscription model. And that's exactly the same as Mendix. So they are both focused on the amount of end users. There are, of course, some differences in the packs where you can buy, I don't know, 1,000 users or 10,000 users, and the pricing. But again, like pricing as well is something I want to say negotiable. So yeah, I'm not going to cover that into too much. So I think I will be. Yeah, I would say we leave all the licensing questions to, they are on a similar fashion, they are user-based,
Yeah,
And
I think one difference that I don't know if it's still true, but because of the infrastructure perspective, I think with Mendix it was a bit more common to pay for an application, whereas with OutSystems, you pay for the size of your environment, whether it's users or application objects. But it might be that recently is also getting closer to each other.
Yeah, maybe it's a good area to explain the difference in environment and applications. I think you mentioned that during the presentation, so let's move into that maybe now.
Yeah, so if you start with the OutSystems training, which I did a half year ago, one of the first things that is really new when you come from Mendix is that OutSystems has something called a 4-layer canvas, and they really thought of how you should set up your modules. And that your modules fit in a layer. So they are core services, or they are an orchestration layer, or they are end user processes. And that way you're setting up your environment with, for example, a lot of registers. Some registers are used by one end user application. Some registers are used by all of them. But for example, such a register, which is a module, has its own little database. And thereby you share your data between the end user processes and your orchestration modules. If you then compare that to Mendix, in Mendix you make an application as modules, and you can integrate one application with another application. But an application by default has a database, and it doesn't share. I think there's ways to set it up like that, but it's not really the most convenient way to build an application.
I would say with Mendix, every app is an island.
Yeah, exactly. And of course you can integrate them, but what you, for example, see with master data management solutions is that you really have to ship data from one application to another. And with OutSystems, that's a bit more supported by the way the environment is layered.
And there's differences, like in a microservices approach. It is a good thing that they're isolated because they're very loosely coupled, because there's actually no way to tightly couple them.
Yeah.
So there's different approaches how to deal with that.
Yeah, you don't have dependency violations when deploying your Mendix. So that might be a good thing then.
Okay, that's I think enough about the licensing model. Shall I take this one? Okay, so maybe the ones that were here for the Kahoot, Mendix use a vast amount of technologies. The development environment you're seeing is built with .NET technology. Database, they have actually support for quite a lot of database types. I think it's on their own cloud, they're using Postgres as a database service, but I think they also support SQL Server, Oracle databases, MySQL. I would say the list is so long that I'll probably forget a few. But that I don't know if you know any that you could add to the list.
It does bring me to an interesting thing that we didn't remark yet, is that Postgres might be running on your own machine. That is a quick difference that we didn't go into yet, but you might, for example, run Mendix and also thereby the database on your own laptop. And it's quite common to do that, and that also explains maybe more the merging and branching functionality that is offered by Mendix. You basically work locally, and that's also why if you look at the screen now, you see on the top, you see a run locally button. There's not a one-click publish, which means that you publish it and you run it at the same time. But you run something locally and then you commit it to the team server, and then you deploy it to other environments.
So let's show that we have currently one change, for example, and we can explicitly, or we have several more changes, can explicitly commit that to the version control. And I think it would be nice to maybe introduce a new entity real quick with just nothing in there. I think this is valid. And if we run this, like the complete development environment is on my own machine. So it currently uses an in-memory database even for small projects. You by default start with that.
Yeah, good point.
And what you will see here is that they synchronize the database, and I'm using an HSQL database engine now. So that's also something that's a little bit different. The actual logic isn't generated. Mendix generates a model, and the model runs on top of the Mendix business server, which is an application server written in Scala and Java. So yeah, I think that would answer the question. If we look at yeah, the front-end technology, React.
Yeah.
For mobile, they're using React Native to compile native applications. Well, any other technology? I think you covered SAS and less with styling.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's hopefully answers this question.
It's a nice bridge to the next question, the offline capabilities. So I already explained that synchronization, which I think is one of the most important topics when you're building an offline app, is a bit different between the two. OutSystems requires a bit more work to set up, but is a bit more flexible. I think offline capabilities is one of the things that's currently the fastest developing feature in Mendix. So we downloaded the latest Surf Studio Pro when setting up the OSMDB. And there you already see that it's a lot further than half a year ago. When I started with building an offline app in Mendix, I think that was 2 or 3 years ago, it was quite difficult. I think if you compare Mendix and OutSystems, Mendix is a bit more comfortable with releasing functionality quickly. And you saw, for example, that they released offline apps without logic. So you could make an offline app, a mobile app, without being able to add logic to the pages. So you could only go from page to page and commit objects to the database. And to that, you could cleverly add some logic, maybe by using widgets on the background. But step by step, they've come pretty far, I think. What I saw that they recently added is that you can also call microflows from nanoflows. So that will be comparable to calling a server action from a client action. So in that sense, I think that offline capabilities, even if they're now, maybe OutSystems is a bit ahead in the sense that it's a bit more mature. I think it's a matter of time that they will be pretty equal on that.
I think in terms of control, as Remco previously already mentioned, OutSystems gives you more flexibility and control.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just briefly want to skip the top one now, go to the second one. Mendix does indeed have something like the Forge. It's called the App Store. And so you can publish widgets, reusable modules that I think that's a different topic, but yeah, I will just go into that. I think Remco mentioned extensions a little bit. So on the backend, you can define your own Java actions, which is in a very similar fashion as with Integration Studio. So you define the name of the action and the API, and Mendix generates some scaffolding, and you can use Eclipse or any Java editor to use everything that's available in the Java ecosystem and program those actions. So yeah, it's the Forge is called the Mendix App Store. Then do we want to first go with the top one?
Yeah,
let's comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. From my experience, I think the learning curve with OutSystems can be a bit steeper, but that's, I think, mainly that it's assuming that you have a bit more of an IT background. So it also, compares to what kind of people are learning the platform. And I have the feeling, but of course I've only been in OutSystems for half a year, that maybe it takes a bit longer to really finish the OutSystems game, to really understand all of the components. Whereas with Mendix, what I had after 3 or 4 years was, of course, with the extensions put on the side, that the Mendix out of the box part at a certain point, I knew.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I think you can, you would probably faster understand and get a grasp of all the features available in Mendix than with OutSystems. And I think it also depends on your background. So what I've seen in the last years, people with an IT background usually adopt OutSystems much easier and much faster. I already saw that in some of the comments. It feels more like programming. I think Remco, while preparing this presentation, I don't think it made the presentation, but
no, of course. No, I said indeed that Mendix is more of an abstraction of programming, whereas OutSystems is a visualization of programming. So I think you already saw that in some examples that we gave. For example, a page context, that is something that's really an abstraction of what is happening on the background. So with OutSystems, when you're learning OutSystems, you're learning, I think, a bit more about what is happening on the background. Whereas Mendix really has that abstraction layer that you can dive into and understand, but by default, you don't need to know it to build an app. So for example, also with associations, the way they are able to support many-to-many is because every association on the background has the database table. Of course, when you want to build applications, it is useful. When you want to build, for example, high-performance applications, it's useful to know that happens on the background. But if you just want to quickly learn how to make an app, yeah, you might not want to know it. So that's a big difference.
Yeah. And to finish the story, people from a business perspective, yeah, they usually adopt Mendix much easier and much faster. I think the next one I'm actually going to show, and that ties into a remark Remco just made. Also, that's a nice thing of having the development environment on your local machine. So I can start up the built-in database viewer, which is a very old-looking app just to have a view of the in-memory database. With a lot of like serious projects, we just used a regular database server. What you see here is the like all the tables that are generated by the Mendix platform. A lot of like system and internal modules, and I'll have to look where are MXDB. So what you see is that Mendix generates a table for every single entity, but also for all the associations. So for example, the this one, if I look at the data, I think here it is. This is just a simple cross table with indexes, and there's maybe also something nice to mention. Like when you look at OutSystems, they also optimize the queries on like the data that's being used. And Mendix does similar things. So for example, what you see a lot of times with XPath, as I say, like you navigate through the data model. So you go from movies to people to salaries to whatever. And Mendix is also smart enough to, like, if you don't do any constraints on the specific tables, they don't join the entity with the association, with the other entity, with the association, et cetera, But they're smart enough to just join the association tables on each other. I think the question was regarding identifiers. What type they are. At this point, they are a big integer. So they are generated by the platform. Actually, I don't exactly sure how this works, but by the kind of the sequence, you can also sort of see what entity type the GUID belongs to. I think they have a sort of an internal GUID generator. So yeah, you don't start at 1, but you start at this like large numbers like that. I think that identifiers, they are always created. Yeah, let's mark this as answered.
Yeah, the next question I find quite interesting, because when I started with OutSystems, I had the opposite opinion. I found Mendix looking a bit more appealing, or the blocks are a bit bigger. But yeah, it's a matter of taste, I think. If you say how does it look in runtime, I'm not sure if you mean
like the actual apps.
Exactly, if you mean the apps or the development environment in the browser. But the apps, I would say, but by default, the widgets that are offered by both platforms, it's pretty similar. I think they both have an UI framework. So that causes that they have some pretty nice building blocks, which look a lot like the apps that we use every day. But you can customize both of them as far as you want.
Great. I think we covered this one already. So it doesn't compile, it generates a model which runs inside of the Mendix business server. I think this one we also covered. So you can create some scaffolding pretty much in a similar fashion. Some Java actions and implement those, and on the front end with widgets and JavaScript. Yeah, there's also something like sorry.
Yeah, basically how that works. I don't know if you can quickly show it in a microflow. I think I can just say here, I can add here a Java action. And then you can give it parameters. You can set the parameter types. You can expose it as an action in the microflow. And what this will result in is a file in your project directory, which you can further extend with Eclipse, for example, which is quite common to use with Mendix. So yeah, it's pretty similar to what OutSystems does with .NET extensions.
So, and I tried not to be opinionated, but maybe on this topic I'm going to comment, because quite recently I've done my first steps with creating a .NET extension and in OutSystems, and yeah, to be quite honest, I didn't really like the experience. I think the API of Mendix is very well documented. They generate proxies for all the entities, for all the microflows, all the actions you generate, which you can call from Java. So everything you can do in the platform can also be done from Java. It might also be that I'm a Java guy instead of a .NET guy. That didn't really help as well. But I think in terms of documentation and support, also the for example, debugging, you can start your app from Eclipse and you can debug the Java code, but also connect the Mendix development environment and debug first in starting Java, and then you can call a microflow, you continue the debugging in the Mendix Studio, and then go back to Eclipse. And so that's, all in all, that's a really nice, nice experience. You want to do the next one?
You can take the composite. I think the answer is no.
No, yeah, you can't.
So yeah,
but I think you cannot also in OutSystems.
No,
so both platforms do not support composite keys.
It was actually one of the questions I had on my professional exam this morning. So I hope I had it right. What would be the biggest challenge for an OS developer when starting with Mendix? Well, we both haven't done that. My opinion on that would be probably that you feel a bit more limited, and you might have to unlearn stuff about how the application runs in the background, because you need to move towards that abstraction, which is a bit more limited and moves a bit away from what happens in the background. I don't know what you think.
I think using XPath, there's kind of a more or less a sense of object orientation in Mendix, which in reality there's no object orientation, but it sort of feels like that, and that's something I see people that are new to Mendix kind of struggle with that. And yeah, I agree. Like the sort of lesser amount of control.
Yeah,
that'll probably be something.
Yeah, I think if you're what you sometimes hear from developers that still use code, that they see low code as something that is a lot easier. I think then Mendix seems a bit more like that than OutSystems, because OutSystems offers almost all the abilities that you have when you're just programming with code. That's an interesting question. Is Mendix a copy-paste way of working, or is it a reusability way? I would say in terms of logic and page components, there's not a big difference. I think both are reusable, although they have their own ways, as we showed, to do that. So for example, Mendix doesn't have the weblogs, which have events. But I think something that is interesting to mention is that if you want to use the same module in multiple applications, and you quite often see that, for example, with a single sign-on module, you would indeed have to copy-paste the module into multiple applications, which is a bit inconvenient if you are updating the module, because you then need to update it in all the applications.
Yeah, and I've been there and done that.
Yeah,
I had a site where I think we created 30 or almost 40 Mendix applications, and there was a security vulnerability in exactly the SS in the SAML module. So yeah, we had to update 40 apps.
Yeah, and I think that's why if you're making an environment with Mendix apps, you might choose a bit quicker for the microservice setup. But of course, with some functionalities like single sign-on, that's really complex, if not impossible.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and I think there's also a concept like you can use the app store within your company. So you have a private app store. So if you have reusable modules that pretty much all your applications use, you can build them, publish them in the app store, and then all your apps from within your own landscape can consume those. And I think, yeah, as well, the architecture perspective is different. So Mendix is more focused on let's say a column architecture. So you build a certain step or a certain process from top to bottom, and then you integrate or expose whatever needs to be done with services. And OutSystems has a layered approach where, like, yeah, you can reuse data and then build up all those layers. And I think that's also something, and this might be slightly opinionated answer, but like the amount of focus and documentation OutSystems provides with the 4-layer canvas and the discovery tool, and I think I'm also tying into the next question.
Good one.
That's yeah, very well done. Mendix, doesn't really do that. I think they're improving on that area. There are some blogs around how you could do microservices architecture, but I would say it's less in a lesser way. I don't think it's that promoted as much as within the OutSystems world.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
In terms of code quality, I think there's also some partnerships with external partners that can like analyze the code, like the architecture dashboard is doing. And I think there's for both platforms some external parties that do that.
Yeah, I would say indeed Mendix is much more tolerant in that sense than OutSystems, which you might find a benefit or
gives you more freedom.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah, in a different way. Yeah. What is the JS framework used in the front end? I expect, well, for Mendix, this is React.js. It used to be until a couple of years ago, I think Dojo.
Yeah.
And they still also use a lot of jQuery in widgets, which I think we also see still in the widgets of OutSystems. What is the front end framework for OutSystems?
Yeah,
React.
React for reactive web apps for mobile, and traditional web is on jQuery, I believe.
Okay. Can you access the database in Mendix directly? No.
Well,
unless you
of.
connect an external database, right?
Well, it depends on the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So in the cloud, you cannot. And also, I think the answer is you should not. So in that sense, like the way identifiers are generated, like you should really not be messing with the database yourself. You should always be going through the platform and accessing the database through that. Like on my development environment, I've just shown you that you can have a look and peek into the database. Sometimes, for example, when there were production issues, I played with a backup of a production database on my local machine and analyzed the database on my local machine. But yeah, in the Mendix cloud, you cannot access the, well, I think you actually can, but it's not not promoted, and yeah, there's only really specific use cases when you allow it.
Yeah.
Can we try and see
differences regarding deploying? Yes, there are. I think that really comes from the way the architecture is set up. In Mendix, you deploy an application to the next environment, and that automatically deploys all the modules. With OutSystems, that's basically what you do, but you are able to deploy certain modules. OutSystems also has 0 downtime. I think Mendix has a little bit of downtime.
Yeah.
And what is quite nice in OutSystems, while you might not always need it, is that there's a dependency check. So because of the way they set up your environment, you quite often have dependencies between modules. And it could be, for example, that you're deploying a new version of a module and you really need to deploy another module to make that work, to not get a dependency conflict. And then OutSystems will tell you about it. I think it would be very nice to show, but looking at the time and the fact that I think the projects that we can deploy might take some time to really find. But I would recommend you, if you're if you're using Mendix, it would be interesting to look at how OutSystems handles that, because that is really different. Yes.
And it's also not needed in a Mendix world, because there's no dependencies between your applications.
Yeah, exactly.
I think let's maybe we have a few minutes left, so let's go to the
top 3.
Yeah, or be really quick about our answers. I think we covered this one already. Well, it was kind of the opposite way. What are the main differences? Well, I think we covered that. Very funny. We're doing our best, but yeah, we have to deal with the webcam. I think they're very common. Regions,
Well, yeah, to be honest, for the question about the common use functionalities, I would say mainly the parameters that you have on a page. I find you are in the local variables. I really miss that in Mendix to make complex pages. And I think more extensive aggregates / queries. I think those are the 2 things that make OutSystems a bit more extensive.
Okay, regions, and I'm not gonna. I just simply don't know. I don't think Mendix supports something like dependency injection. That's something really like codey. Multiple applications. I think we've mentioned that a little bit. That's maybe a good one actually. For me, it had absolutely nothing to do with technology, to be honest. So it was more of a business and growth opportunity for me. To switch to this company, and they just happened to work only with OutSystems. So for me, there was nothing, technology that I liked one platform or the other better. I think it's slightly different for Remco.
Yeah, for me, I didn't move jobs because of the technology, but I did actually when I knew that I wanted to stop with my previous job, I did think maybe I want to go into a bit more technical way. And so I was even looking at some high code jobs. But I think that OutSystems is a nice in-betweener there between Mendix and high code in terms of the learning curve.
Well, thank you both Kilian and Remco. I think we're gonna round up. It's nicely 8:30. and you have answered, I think, all most interesting questions. I do see some questions left with just 3 thumbs up and etc. So they are less interesting. Maybe some fun for one-on-one with some people when you make contact in the future. But I don't think it's interesting for the whole group of 120 people that are still in. Exactly. I would like to give Miguel Melo the last wording to close down this meetup. And
all right. Okay. Yeah. No, it's okay. So I would absolutely like to thank Kilian and Remco for the great presentation. As the comments have said, it's very balanced view on both technologies. I think either side, either CEO, if he's listening in, I think he will not feel misrepresented. I think you guys covered like a ton of content, more than I expected it would be possible to do. So yeah, and I would like also to thank everyone that attended, and I'm sure you're gonna appreciate what you took in here. I think there's like a closer question or something, right? Which I'm not aware of the script. Is it?
Yeah.
All
so
right.
Kilian, if you could stop sharing your screen, sorry, we just need to pass a really quick survey just to get the feedback and possible topics for the next user group as well. So it's really important. Let me just share my screen. Wait, faces here. Okay, so it's really important for us just to get the ideas of what you want to hear on the next user group and let us know what was good, what was bad, and yeah. So if you could just scan the QR code, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and we also, I think a few people already on Slido, we opened up the poll for a little bit of feedback again on our presentation for ourselves.
Yeah.
Adriana, I cannot select this user group in the questionnaire.
You cannot?
Yes. No, only Belgium, London, Brazil, North America.
Yes.
Wait, let me check. Give me just a second.
There's no Netherlands option.
Oh.
We are almost Belgium, so.
Let me try.
The closest you can get.
Do smile when you're looking forward.
It sounds like it's like low-code development. The server is actually being changed as we're looking at it.
Okay, it should be fine now. Let me just share my screen again.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I can see Netherlands 1905.
Yeah, so just what would you like to hear on the next user group? That's one of the major questions because this is for the community and we do want to please you and get back to your expectations. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's wrap it up. So thank you for joining us in the user group.
Katarina, could you share the link in the chat because I don't have a phone to go to the QR code.
Yeah, let me try. There. So thank you, Remco and Kilian, for the great presentation. It was awesome. From what I see in the comments, everyone loved it. So you really kept it objective. It was amazing. Thank you for delivering it.
Welcome. It was a pleasure to do it. So I'd say, yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and
thanks for the many questions as well.
And yeah, see you at the next user group.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
En how do we?
So the diehards are staying.
Always.
For
Andrea.
everybody that already left but kept his Zoom on.
Andrea, what? What did you say?
You look lovely.
I look lovely? No, I look...
You were like this.
Tired. And ready to have dinner.
It's still early.
Let's end the session.
Okay, team.
See you next time.
Bye.
Yes.